Thanks so much for that thorough introduction. I feel like I don't really have to talk anymore. Thanks again for making the trek out here, and special thanks to Jenny and Jennifer for the kind invitation, and Now and everyone at Roski for hosting me, and also just organizing this wonderful lecture series. It's a great company to be in on the poster. So, and it's an extra special kind of talk for me because, as I think Jenny mentioned, I did go to school here. Actually, I had to do the math, and I started 15 years ago this year in the Master's of Public Art Studies program, and Karen was my teacher, so it's nice to see some familiar faces and many new ones. So tonight I'm going to talk for hopefully about 45 minutes, and I'll spend the bulk of the time, I think, talking about my work with the Center for Land Use Interpretation. That's how I spend most of my time and energy, at least the last 10 years or so. And then I'll leave some time to share a few other projects I'm involved in, and I'll try to keep plenty of time for questions too. And so the logo for the Center for Land Use Interpretation you see on these double screens. We're a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1994, actually up in the Bay Area, and quickly moved down to where we've been based in downtown Culver City. We are interested in understanding the built landscape, the contemporary landscape in the United States. We have a mission statement because we are a nonprofit, and technically we're dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge about how our nation's lands are apportioned, utilized, and perceived. And I'll talk more about what that means, and I think with some of the students tomorrow, we'll continue to unpack that. Working earlier. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So perhaps in more plain speak is we're interested in the ways in which humans interact with the land they inhabit and transform. And we kind of believe that you can find meaning and understanding in kind of looking at, studying the marks we're leaving as humans. And these marks can be small, they can be really large, they can be barely visible. Because everything's kind of land use if you think about it. Like, we're using land right now, we're occupying space. There's really a full range of activities that fall under that category. So we'll talk more about how my work as a curator works under that very, very large mission statement and theme. So back again to what the focus is of the center, we consider the landscape of the USA to be a built landscape. And again, we're looking at the contemporary landscape, and we're defining landscape as something that's a process that humans are a part of. We're not separate from, but we are shaping, and it's changing all the time. So if we're taking that kind of approach, it's hard for us to distinguish between the built landscape and the natural landscape because they can kind of be seen as one and the same. It's human nature to build things in the ways we do, kind of like it's natural for ants to build anthills and birds to build nests. We just build things like power plants and schools and land art and dumps, and other things too. But every square foot in this country has been affected by humans in some way, even if that means kind of setting it aside. And there was some decision, some conscious decision made, an effort towards not touching it, towards preservation. And so we kind of look at as a whole these marks we're leaving on the ground, and we can think of them as like a cultural inscription that we can read to better understand who we are as humans, our culture, and our society. So that's the big picture goal and kind of some terms and definitions we're looking at. We're not really an environmentalist group. We're also not industry affiliated, but we're interested in the full range of activities and therefore the attitudes that they reflect that play out across land in the United States. We have this list of terms you'll see up here, And these are kind of these thematic program areas. We're always thinking about distinct aspects of the built landscape that we feel together begin to create a portrait of contemporary land use in the United States. So kind of why study these things? One, it's kind of just, the shared space of the physical earth is one of the very few things that we all have in common. Like, our lives all play out on the physical earth at a very basic level. And land is something, we all engage with, but it's also perhaps the most loaded thing there is. And so that's why one reason we find it so rich, so important to kind of spend time and think about. So for us, it makes sense also to start our work from the ground up. We focus our efforts on the United States, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is, the people that run the organization were kind of born and raised in the United States for the most part. That's the culture that birthed us, and so that's the point of view we have been conditioned to have. It's what we know, and I wouldn't begin to feel equipped to tackle the complex cultural, socioeconomic, cultural complexities that inform land use in other places. It just wouldn't be respectful. It would just be nonsense. But another reason we stick to the United States is that we kind of like the idea that you don't have to look far and wide to find something seemingly interesting or compelling or even, exotic, and that you can look in your backyard, so to speak. So over the years, we functioned as both a support system for artists and other creative researchers, as well as an independent creative research organization that produces and presents original in-house exhibitions, research resources, publications, public programs, all looking at land use in the United States. We are a national organization in scope, but we have to be headquartered out somewhere, and that happens to be in downtown Culver City. Right next door is another wonderful nonprofit, the Museum of Jurassic Technology, and recommend if you come visit us both. And out of this Culver City storefront, we always have an exhibition on view, and we keep open hours Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, noon to 5. You can come on in, there's always something to see, often drawing from one of those terms, those land use program areas, or a special region. And those exhibits tend to be developed in-house by myself and our team of researchers and colleagues. And we don't have a lot of square feet there, so we often utilize a lot of screens in our exhibitions, because that's one way you can fit in a lot of information. And we tend to like images and video, and tend to be a little wordy sometimes, but through touch screens and screens, you can fit in a lot of content with not a lot of space. We also often utilize audio. We always have a soundtrack to our exhibitions, often taken from field recordings from a site related to the exhibition. And that just kind of, I just always hate that being in a gallery where it's that awkward silence, and so we avoid that here, hopefully. And so through these various programs, these exhibitions, public programs and such, we point to things like this sign does. In doing so, we hope to let people know where they might look, but not necessarily tell them what to think about these things. In that way, though, of course, in pointing, you're directing attention. We're leaving other things out, everything around that's not the direction of the arrow. And in that way, it is a form of curation. It's a point of view, almost like this optical instrument, which provides a frame, just like the museum or the gallery is a frame that informs the way you read whatever is inside of it. And so in our work and in my work, I spend a lot of time pointing and framing and thinking about frames and the context, because that's everything for us. And So we're also reminded of the many layers of interpretation that are involved in any image we're presented with. So this is an old photo that doesn't even matter where it came. I mean, it's a sub-center photo, but it doesn't even matter what the site is. But the fact that somebody decided it was meaningful enough, significant enough to put a plaque here, that's one layer of interpretation. Another layer of interpretation is added by the person in the yellow shirt who's saying something about it. Another layer of interpretation is being added by the fellow with the camera who is documenting the scene. Another layer of interpretation is here from the invisible interpreter, the photographer, the person who took the photo you see. There could have been a whole other camera crew or an elephant or something on the other side, but we don't know. We don't have that information. And another layer of interpretation is added by it being presented in this lecture, so on and so forth. So it's kind of this very simple but helpful reminder that images are really complex and far from neutral. So our work, I said before, we're very ground-based. We do this thing we call ground truthing in our research, which just means going to a place, seeing what there is to see, looking, listening, documenting the site through things like photography, video, and audio recording. And when we're on site, we really try to just ask ourselves really basic questions, almost regress to take a child's point of view and just be like, what is that thing? How did it get here? What is that as a starting point? And then we, of course, combine it with secondary materials, things like articles, clippings, maps, ephemera, and ways in which it's been interpreted or presented by other things, like brochures or newspaper articles. And we bring it back to the office where we file and process it and kind of digest it and turn it into programs and exhibitions and things. So many of the sites we visit and photos we take end up going into this thing called the Land Use Database. It's perhaps at the heart of our organization. It was initiated in 1994, so the same year our organization was founded, early days of the internet. And it's been a important part of our work. It's an inventory or collection of thousands of unusual and exemplary land use sites in the United States that have been mapped, photographed, and described by people involved with the organization. And it's not something that's meant to be static, but it's changing because the landscape, again, is always changing. So this is an example. You can zoom in on any of these sites, flags, and click one, and then get a little bit of information. This is one for Effigy Tumulai. It's a lesser-known land art site by Michael Heiser, the artist who's more famous for things like City and Double Negative. But here it is. This is an example of an interesting and compelling cultural land use site, I would say. So there it is. You see it on the map. You also see a couple images of it taken by people involved with the organization, and then a short description to kind of tell you what it is. But it's not meant to be exhaustive. It's meant to be just enough information so you know where you can find out more, and you know kind of if it's interesting. It's something that's not kind of crowdsourced like Wikipedia. It's all kind of written from the institutional point of view. And so this is a really compelling, I hope more people write about, like art historians write about this artwork because it's such a curious one. It's kind of Michael Heiser's almost reclamation project outside of Chicago, kind of his version of kind of the mound building culture that tends to be, that's in the Midwest. And it's kind of hasn't been maintained. It's in part of a state park. And so it's a really curious land use site, I would say. Another example, just to give you a sense of the types of sites that might be in there, this is a waste site, Green River Uranium Disposal Cell in southern Utah. And so this is kind of one of a dozen or 2 dozen uranium disposal cells that we visited and photographed as part of a larger exhibition called Perpetual Architecture looking at these low-level radio waste repositories, kind of these radioactive pyramids that are built often in the Southwest where the climate's arid, with the intention of kind of burying this low-level radioactive waste for thousands of years so it can't get in the way of humanity. And formally, this one happens to take the shape of this like literal pyramid. So again, a little bit of information so you know where you can look to find more. The photos and videos and sites we often document and take will find themselves in publications we make and these exhibitions we put together. The exhibitions take place out of our main facility in LA, as well as other non-commercial venues around the world, mostly arts and culture museums. We've produced over 100, I don't know how many now, exhibitions on different land use themes and regions in the US. And so this is just kind of a snapshot from our website, actually, where you can click on each one and find more about each topic. We really think of the website as kind of the living archive of our organization and the way most people engage with our work. So let's see if this works. I can't find my cursor. There we go. So this is, I thought I'd go into just a couple of these projects and programs in a tiny bit more detail so you just get a sense of our work. This is a more recent exhibition from last year called Venting the Earth, looking at geothermal energy. And it features these videos, these almost kinetic images, as well as a quite present soundtrack of these steaming geothermal plants. And the one you see here is outside of the Salton Sea, which is where the second biggest cluster of geothermal activity in the US is based. But these geothermal power plants convert the internal heat of the earth into electricity, and they aggregate these multiple deep drilled wells that bring hot fluids to the surface of the earth, providing pressure and steam to spin these turbines that generate electricity. And so less than 0.5% of the total electric supply in the US today is produced by geothermal plants. So not so much, but the amount is growing and could provide as much as 15% in the future, or more, some people say. So electricity from these geothermal plants is classified as a renewable energy because it taps and cools just a tiny fraction of the Earth's internal heat. So the video, our exhibition included a series of these videos from different geothermal power plants, but always kind of from this static, or kind of like the, let's see, oops, here's another one. So this is also in the Salton Sea, and I kind of love them for their aesthetic qualities too, kind of this mysterious black box that's just steaming. And when you're on site, you know, you're just kind of, especially in the Salton Sea, because there's so many of them in the area, you kind of see these plumes billowing up all around you, going off, and they're really loud too. And so that was one thing we were trying to kind of capture in our exhibition in LA. But geothermal energy, it's kind of was part of this, sometimes we have little themes, sub-themes for our programming, and so we've been kind of on a alternative energy kick right now. And so our current exhibition is on pumped storage hydropower. But if anyone has any questions about this, it'll all be featured in a big write-up on our website, and we put out a print newsletter every year, and it's going to press very, very soon. So you can, even though you missed the exhibition, you can learn more about it. So there are about 75 geothermal power plants in the US. Some are scattered, but most of them are in the West and in clusters. 70% of the national production is in California. And again, Imperial County near San Diego, those Salton Sea plants I showed, have 15 of those plants alone. And then the largest concentration of geothermal power is up in Northern California at the geysers. Another exhibition that we worked on. This one's a couple years old, but it's called Hollowed Earth, The World of Underground Business Parks. So this one looked at, it was mostly centered in the Midwest, and looked at this vast network of underground office, storage, and logistics facilities that were kind of being developed in these former limestone mines. As a result, we have these artificial drive-in caves that can extend for miles and house a subterranean analog of the world above. Inside, there are millions of square feet that have been paved, wired, lighted, and walled into these underground blocks of commercial real estate. And so there's this idea of kind of hidden in plain sight here, and also adaptive reuse, I guess. It's like what happens when you have significantly altered something so much, you can't erase that. So what do you do? And I guess it was very creative and industrious of them to, after it was done out of limestone, turn it into real estate. So this is Gateway Commerce Center in Baumann, Pennsylvania. It's one of a couple dozen of these type of underground business parks in old limestone mines that we looked at. And it's so interesting. There's no sun out here, but there's windows to the outside world oftentimes, and all the visual cues, the things we recognize as being an office park. They celebrate holidays here, and there's parking. There's a lot of parking often. And if anyone's ever been in a cave, you'll know the temperature is always pretty cool. And because there's also no natural light, it makes it a really good environment, a good place for storing things like archives, film archives. This is the federal government who rents out space here for the National Records Center. Here in, this one's in Missouri too. And this one is the office of Subtropolis outside of Kansas City. At the time of our research, it was the largest by far of such complexes in the United States. And the developer there is Hunt Midwest. And it was started as kind of a local asphalt mining, limestone mining company, and they carved out this mine. And then in around 1964, they started leasing out space, and for businesses like now, as this gopher says, Gus, I think he's a gopher, like Hallmark rents out space, the U.S. Postal Service rents out space, a lot of tech, server places and all kinds of things, and there's a big film archive inside, and so it is the world's largest underground business complex, so they say. And I think it still is, though. But there are, at the time of our exhibition a couple years ago, there are 4.5 miles of paved road inside, 2.1 miles of rail spurs, 350 truck docks, 1,500 parking spaces, and around 50 of these companies that were leasing office space here, employing over 100 people. It's really a trip. I mean, there are umbrellas and picnic tables to have your lunch inside this interior space, and it's really fascinating. And that sometimes our exhibitions or parts of our exhibitions end up traveling or appearing in different forms, like publications and exhibitions that other people put on. And this, some images from this project, which we called Hollow Earth, are part of a group exhibition in the UK called Hollow Earth. Ours is Hollowed Earth. And it looks at kind of caves in arts and culture, and that's kind of just closed at Nottingham Contemporary, and is going to tour around as a Hayward Gallery touring exhibition. This is another exhibition we did. This one's 10 years old now, but this was in collaboration with the Getty Pacific Standard Time program you might be familiar with. This one, this year, everyone gathered around this central theme of modern architecture in LA. This was 2013. And so for us, we thought, okay, what is the ultimate prefab architecture? It's the office trailer. And so that was our focus. And we called it OnSite Office Trailers, Invisible Architecture of the Urban Environment. And we called it invisible because, one, they often plop into places to support the construction of higher profile architecture. And then they go away when the construction is over. And then two, we called it invisible because they're so commonplace, these structures, that we don't even see them anymore because they're everywhere. So for that exhibition, we actually got our own little office trailer and parked it in downtown Culver City in a vacant lot across from our office. If you've been to Culver City now, it's where the Culver steps are. So, and all kinds of offices for Amazon and stuff. So, but in it we had a photo exhibition, kind of a survey, a typological survey of office trailers in the city at the time, as well as displays about where office trailers come from. We also had public programming in the form of these guided bus tours. We used to do these a lot, but it's a way to kind of get people to engage with these places, direct contact with these places, which we think is great. You know, we all remember places better when we see them with our own eyes and we've been there instead of just a picture. So we would facilitate these bus tours. They're kind of just these day-long, sometimes 2-day-long journeys into a place, often tied to an exhibition, kind of. And for this one, it was almost like a tour into the future of the city of Los Angeles, because we were visiting office trailers, like prominent office trailer parks in the city. So we went to Tom Bradley International Terminal, which was under construction. The 405 freeway was being expanded at the time, and we met with the person who designed the textured surface on the walls of the 405 north of the Getty, and the Broad Museum was under construction. Anyhow, it was a way of seeing the city through its future, these office trailers, which and we don't usually repeat tours. So that one they're really specific to the time and place. We also often have, you can see a little screen on these buses where we have video, we often have soundtracks, and also special guests that join us along the way. So this direct importance of kind of direct contact with places is something we really, really believe in. And so another way that we help people or encourage them to experience landscape directly is through these regional facilities we have throughout the US. We think of them as interpretive sites that are both destinations, places to go, as well as points of departure for exploring the transformed landscapes of the US. They're kind of like visitor centers that you might encounter at the National Park Service. They give you some background information, help frame things for you, and then become portals into the places themselves. So we've operated many of them over the years. Sometimes they're long-term, sometimes they're only for a couple months. Right now we operate sites in Wendover, Utah, Hinckley, California, and this one you see here at Owens Lake, California. We've also had places in Troy, New York, Houston, Texas, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Lebanon, Kansas, Granite City, Illinois, Boron even. But they range. Some are really simple presentation venues like a single building, and others are more sprawling, and some others are designed to support the production and research on site and residencies and stuff. And so this is our most recent location in, we call CLUI Swansea. It's located on the shore of the dried up Owens Lake, about 3 hours northeast of Los Angeles in the Eastern Sierras. And so the facility is there to explore the visual characteristics and phenomenology of the region, especially the lake itself, which is going through this curious phase. It's kind of this new kind of landscape, one that is wholly engineered to control the effects of desiccation. I mean, you hear about it all in the news now, and it's happening a lot in this Great Salt Lake as well, these kind of terminal lakes where there's no drainage. But this is kind of, maybe seen as one example of how to deal with it. And so if some of you maybe have been to Owens Lake, but it's up the 395 and a wonderful drive, but it was once a wet lake and over 100 square miles. And it was mostly drained off 110 years ago with the construction of the LA Aqueduct in 1913. So this left this dangerous dust bowl, which has been cited as the #1 source of dust pollution in the United States. So as a result, the LA Department of Water and Power, the DWP, has been legally forced to help fix this unhealthy condition that they created, and have spent over $1 billion remaking, re-engineering this lake to something that is possibly acceptable and healthy for the future. So it's this strange, totally bizarre, managed and engineered cyborg lake of sorts. So this you see here is one of the DWP's dust mitigation techniques that here on this, you can see this is a bunch of their best available control measures, or their the DWP's dust mitigation techniques. So this one is my eyes are so bad, but it's kind of the leafy pond one, the blue one in the key. And so each of these different techniques, one of them sprinklers, running sprinklers over this dry lake to kind of keep the dust down. Each is engineered to perform a specific function that collectively, again, adds up to something that hopefully is habitable. And you can visit the lake, and that's why we're there, actually. We have displays and exhibits, but again, the idea is to provide a point of entry to go explore the site itself. It's also a wonderful bird watching habitat, and there's all these bird walking trails that DWP is now kind of, developing to kind of shift the narrative, and it is kind of a curious thing to think that some of these birds weren't there before, and so maybe these dust mitigation techniques are creating new kinds of habitats for new species. But anyhow, we're open seasonally, and we're just getting ready for our next season in like a week or so, and we'll be open for about 4 or 5 weekends, regular hours, anyone can drop in. The last few seasons have been focused on this program we call the Owens Lake Land Observatory that you see here, and it's presented through this immersive multimedia presentation that showcases views of the lake that couldn't be seen from the ground. So a lot of those dust mitigation techniques you can see in the kind of poor photo here. But the idea is that it's kind of like an inverse of a typical observatory. Instead of looking up into the sky, you're looking down on the land. So the next open season, which is coming up, we're going to announce very soon, is going to focus on a new exhibit on the fountains of Owens Lake. And so we also host other programs on site here. This season, Alexander Robinson's Landscape Morphology Lab will be back with some new displays. Alex is a landscape architect and Owens Lake expert, as well as a professor at USC Architecture. And the last few years, we've actually co-taught this class, this summer field course out of the architecture school, but open to all kinds of students, that entails visiting Owens Lake and Swansea, as well as a range of these sites in California, Nevada, and Utah, to kind of study the physical and conceptual frames that inform the ways in which we understand and experience all types of places in the kind of so-called American West, but it doesn't have to be. It's just because we're based in LA, and we have to drive. So we visit sites ranging from Owens Lake to Manzanar to Spiral Jetty and Sun Tunnels and Bingham Copper Pit. So I'm not sure if we're offering it next year yet, but we might. You can keep your eyes out, and I can also let Jenny and Jennifer know if it's on the books. So, because we've loved having, we've seen some familiar faces here. One of the wonderful things is we've managed to have half art and half architecture students, which makes for a really wonderful experience. Anyhow, that's my promotional bit. But CLUI Wendover is another one of our regional facilities, and it also happens to be on that itinerary for the class we teach. But since 1996, we've run a complex here at the ruins of the World War II military base that's in Wendover, on the edge of the Salt Flats at the border of Utah and Nevada. So if you've driven along Highway I-80, you've probably driven right through Wendover. It's where the Bonneville Salt Flats are, right at the border. The Nevada side is a casino town, and the Utah side is this former World War II military base. That was the largest military reserve in the world in area by 1943. It housed the training program for the first atomic bombing missions, so it really has global significance, even though it may appear to be the middle of nowhere. Some of the airfield is still active military land, but the county now runs and manages the airport and the 100 or so buildings that remain on the base, a few of which we rent out for our programs. And so this aerial image kind of gives you a taste of some of the varied activities that happen here and why we find it kind of so compelling for an organization that studies land use. So in the foreground, you have West Wendover, some residences. The middle ground, you see a lot of the remaining buildings in the military base. And then in the back, you see those ponds. Those are potash mining evaporation ponds. And so it's, we'll get deeper into it. So we rent out a couple buildings. We ran a residence program for 20 years and continue to work with artists and other creative researchers on site on projects that can only be done there. So it's not kind of like a McDowell where you get a nice picnic basket and it's very comfortable. It's a bit it's a bit uncomfortable actually, and we have a former resident here also, so we can speak to that. But we're there because of the curious land uses and history of this place. So in our backyard is the Enola Gay Hangar, which you see here. Another building, this was the first building we rented out. It's an old World War II military barracks that we use for galleries to show rotating programs about the place. This is another building we rent out. It's our recommended starting point for visitors who come, and we call it the Orientation Building. Outside you see an artwork by Deborah Stratman, who participated in our residence program. And it's part of a project called Power Exchange, which includes a functional and sculptural radio tower that taps into the radio waves in the area, which, when she built in the early 2000s, was busy with activity from the nearby casinos, fast food drive-thrus, highway patrol, and truckers along I-80. And so you can switch a dial that taps into each of those different channels, and it also allows for two-way communication with the visitor. But anyhow, we recommend people start here, and we meet with a lot of school groups. I think this is actually a USC group. Access to the building and many of our regional exhibit facilities, at least in the past, has been by this push-button door code system. You call the phone number at the door when you get there, and you get the access code. So our staff is usually based in Los Angeles, but this is a way we can keep these facilities open year-round or more of the year, even though we're not always there. And there's also a lot of trust with the visitor then, which I really love. But unfortunately, COVID kind of threw that a little bit out of whack. We're still figuring out how to make it work, and you still can visit these using the push-button system. So inside, again, you have displays about the place. The Core was filmed in Wendover, along with many other films like The Hulk, which is that green thing you see in the vitrine. So it's a fun being this type of curator, I must say. This is what we call the resident support unit, where most of the hundreds of artists and researchers that have come through to work on projects with us over the years have stayed and been based out of. So again, it has everything you need. It has internet, power, water, heat, but it's not fancy by any means. But it's well positioned to kind of explore the area. And again, even though we have a full workshop and studio and everything, and internet, we really think of its main purpose as a base to support field work, to explore the actual places around us. This is an old ball mill site out just east of our place, by the old potash mines. This is an example of one of the projects that has been produced by a resident. This is by William Lamson, and he constructed this room-sized diorama in a World War II armament building. And it was all about exploring solidifycation. And so you had to get this key, and then you went inside this chamber, and you found this room-sized diorama that was becoming more and more encrusted in salt crystals over time, dripping salt water that was collected from the nearby intrepid potash canals. This is a project by Hans Baumann, who's here today, a landscape architect based in LA, who researched microbialites, sometimes referred to as these living stones. They're carbonate rock structures that can grow over 30 feet tall and be over 10,000 years old, and were once the dominant life form on this planet, but today very few places kind of can support them, and one of them is the north arm of the Great Salt Lake. And this is another resident project. But it was also a platform that supported other people. And it was created by a design build group called Simpark in 2003. And so it's off the grid, early off the grid. You know, you had to bike in your own water, run by solar power. Simpark was interested in engaging these ideas of sustainability, as well as utopian communal living experiments like Biosphere 2, as well as myths of the frontier and the industrial military legacy. Its site is here in what we call South Base, this former munitions area for the Wendover Air Base that to this day remains sealed off from the public and is on restricted access land behind a U.S. Air Force fence and gate. And so it's still sometimes used for military and police training activities, but it makes it a really compelling place for artists and researchers as well. And so it's really provides an unusual condition in that you are kind of sealed off from everyday life, and it can feel like the edge of the earth. And so here you see, we rent a couple of these buildings here, and then in the back you see these, what they call igloos, those munition bunkers that were used for the war, but many of them have transitioned, again, adaptive reuse, and are rented out by the casinos for record storage. So, but one of the ideas behind Simpark's project and our interest in South Base was to provide access and a platform to support other people's creative research in this place that was the site of some of the most, perhaps the most extreme activities, and see if it was possible to cultivate something generative and maybe even hopeful on these testing grounds where there are literal marks from kind of, this really horrible time. So we also operate a space in Hinckley, California, in the Mojave Desert, in the town of Hinckley, which is was most famous perhaps because of Aaron Brockovich. Maybe you saw the movie with Julia Roberts, but it's known for contaminated water. And so there was an old school desert research station that had sat there, and so we started renting it out in, I think it was 2000 or 2001, and actually often with these big projects, we start out in collaboration again with the support of a larger institution. So this was part of Connie Butler's flight pattern show at MoCA. And but it's here to focus on the California desert region, and inside has interpretive displays about this place. There's also there's an outdoor interpretive walking trail with some interactive and sculptural features. The kind of theme of this space, especially the outdoor walking trail, is on the sound space of the place. The DRS, which is how we call it shorthand, is located under the flight path of Edwards Air Force Base, which has been a major place for testing experimental aircraft since the dawn of the jet and space ages. You can hear sonic booms sometimes when you're out there and you see unusual looking aircraft. And so that kind of sets the tone for this place. This is a project by Deborah Stratman and Steve Badgett, who have done some projects exploring the history of this sonic and militarized space. It's a pair of binaural listening horns modeled after pre-radar acoustic surveillance technologies that were used to monitor the sound of incoming enemy aircraft. And so you can pivot around on the seat, and whatever you aim it to at, it'll be acoustically amplified. And it was constructed mostly from salvaged jet plane parts from the area. This is a complementary piece also on the walking trail called Desert Resonator, also made from jet plane parts. And it's a 6-string Aeolian harp that's designed to resonate with the wind, producing these multi-harmonic drones that are contingent upon the force and consistency of the air currents. And they describe it really beautifully as translating the wind. The last project that I'll show you is one that's kind of hard to see because it's an interactive sound piece by the artist Leroy Stevens, who's based here in LA. And it's called Underground Sculpture. So he buried rebar at different levels underground in this parcel of land off the walking trail. And on the walking trail, you check out these metal detectors, which Leroy selected based on the sound they made. And so then you get this interactive sound piece that is activated by the user. And so the DRS is currently kind of in a dormant mode right now. We're getting ready for its next big program, which hopefully will be fall 2024 as part of the next round of the Getty's PST program. So if you're interested, you can keep your eyes peeled for that. And so let me just check the time. Maybe if there's some time, I'll just go through a couple of these other activities I'm involved in. Because it's, while like the Center for Land Use Interpretation is kind of my full-time job, and it's something I really, really believe in, it's not the right container for all the things I want to do. It has a mission statement, and not everything I want to do fits that institutional profile and voice. And so it's been really important for me to maintain an independent curatorial practice, as well as make space for other projects that are kind of hard to categorize. So I like to say I'm like independent curator with a very lowercase c, I and C, and because they're kind of funny projects sometimes, and sometimes I even question to call them curatorial projects, and so I've been defaulting to the word researcher because it kind of becomes this catch-all for everything, because everything's research. And anyhow, this is a recent one that's a more straightforward exhibition, and it's up right now at MoCA Tucson, and it's called Plain Air, and it's a group exhibition with I believe 7 artists. And it explores shifting ideas of what Western landscape and less painting and field work can be. It kind of takes traditional plein air painting as a point of departure to explore ideas about, land use, as well as surveying and settling public and private space, and also the idea of field work itself, or the embodied experience of being in place. And so, there's very little like straightforward plein air painting, but there is one piece which you can kind of see right by the title, by K.B. Jones, and then the rest are kind of expand on that. And it's kind of one of the criteria for this exhibition. It's kind of silly how basic it is. Was by like all the works for me had to literally include painting outdoors. So another thing that's important for me is to bring some joy and have fun and have some humor in all of these projects. And it's in the center's work too, but I feel like it's something that doesn't get acknowledged all the time in work that can still be rigorous, but can also have these lighter elements. And so this is kind of I'll just quickly go through this, but in the front we have some work by an artist named Hilary Mushkin, who has a project called Incendiary Traces. She's in the foreground with the table. And so she kind of has been looking at kind of a through line between 19th century and contemporary methods used to survey the US-Mexico border in her project, which is part of this ongoing project, which involves plein air painting or draw-in sessions at kind of contested places. And then that painting you see is by Esteban Cabeza de Vaca. And for him, he starts these paintings as kind of traditional plein air paintings. But they're always, like this one in particular, they end up being layered, including like removing and adding portions of it when he comes back to the studio. And they're always very personal based on the artist's lived experience. And so this one is called How Mora, New Mexico Stopped Fracking, and reflects on a 2015 banning of hydraulic fracking in this town of Mora, New Mexico, which was the artist's paternal homeland. And so it becomes this portal that frames the landscape and again shows hope that another future is possible. And in the back we have, it's really small, but I think there should be more images online. We have a work by Sterling Wells, who's here, an LA-based artist, who again takes plein air painting, goes outside with an easel, but often, you know, there's such a sculptural element as well. The easel has been constructed by found materials on site, in this case the Arroyo Seco, and really one thing I love is that the, traditional plein air painting is often done in a single setting, a single sitting, and the idea is to capture this single quality of light, this moment, and Sterling kind of returns to the site again and again, and really becomes a part of that environment. For this work, Sterling kind of dug himself into a little hole and sat up there for weeks and kind of painted the place day after day and became familiar with the people and all kinds of aspects of the place. This is another work this one's by Iris who is based here in LA. And Iris works in relation to people, plants, histories, practices, and environments, and uses paint, language, fiber, soil, a lot of organic matter to create these assemblages that trace networks within a landscape. And for parts of this work, which she does on canvas, and so she just rolls it up and takes it out in the field with her, and she literally just traces the shadows of plants and kind of to create the base level of these paintings, also using often organic pigments that she creates. This is a work by an artist named Susanna Batten based in Tucson. And so it's informed by this research. She's been obsessed or fascinated with the U.S. Bureau of Land Management's standard environmental color chart. The BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, the federal government, has this palette of standardized colors you're allowed to paint infrastructure and buildings so they kind of blend in. And so her project was called Leave No Trace, and it really kind of is about, poses a lot of questions about the use of paint as a tool for concealing human impact on the land by the federal government. This is a work by Paula Wilson, an artist based in Carrizozo, New Mexico. And this one is kind of, literally painting. She's painting, this figure is getting painted on. But this is a video work and that challenges these Western art historical tropes of kind of painting, what painting is, and a painting's creation myth, while calling attention to the act of seeing as well as being seen. And then this is another recent exhibition I organized by an LA-based artist, Kristin Posten. So when I used to work for an organization called High Desert Test Sites, and which is based in Joshua Tree and was co-founded by the artist Andrea Zattel. And in it, I got to work with hundreds of artists, which was really, really wonderful. But when I stopped working there, it made me really want to just work with artists one-on-one. And so, and I also found that there are a lot of opportunities for kind of artists who have been out of school for a couple years to show in group shows, but very few opportunities with substantial support and also just solo or two-person exhibition opportunities. And so this is a project that was the result of many years of dialogue with an artist named Kristin Posten, based in LA. And we started off just, we were both obsessed with domes. And so that is often, I think of these sometimes as kind of, that's often how these projects start, just being interested in something. So this is domes. And, in the resulting exhibition, she reimagines what the US Capitol dome might be if it factored in things like transparency and, reflected the people it serves. And so this was started in whatever year that the Me Too movement started, so a while ago. And this is a project that, it was delayed because of COVID and ended up being on view just last year. But it did have to morph because of there was such a long digestion period. And this is another kind of project I worked with, the work of a Kiev-born, LA-based artist named Tanya Brodsky. And I feel like my public art education came in handy here. It's a public art project with the city of West Hollywood, comprised of several of these these sculptures, these colorful sculptures that evoke a children's playground of the kind ubiquitous during the Soviet era, where in like Tanya's childhood. And so the sculptures kind of look like playground equipment, but they're a little wonky. Their proportions are a little bit off. Might be too tall or too short or missing key elements, or installed at kind of an absurd angle or relationship to the other works. And so the installation's title is Yolki-Palki, which is a Russian nonsense phrase that kind of, I've been told, is expressing frustration or alarm, commonly used instead of a curse word around children. And so it's something I'd worked with Tanya before, on other projects, and so this was kind of, it was really fun to go through the proposal process for this one. We just responded to a call for proposal the city of West Hollywood had, which was a call for curators, which was interesting to me, and I found it's kind of really wonderful how transparent it is in a way. You know the budget ahead of time, you know the location, but it was a huge learning experience for both of us, and it's a whole nother language. Yeah. And the last project I'll show is kind of an example of one of those projects that I just call them research projects. I don't really know what they are, or even sometimes I don't know if they actually are work or projects, anything serious, but I have a couple of these projects or things that I just do. And, often, if one example is like, I just can't stop taking pictures and noticing castles in the US. Like Burbank has a ton of them. And what does it mean about this place and the aspirations and values? But I don't know if it's anything. And it might not be, and that's okay, but I've just been collecting them for a long time. And maybe one day it'll be a project, or maybe it won't. But I think for me, it's been really important to keep that kind of practice as well. But one of my favorite books I love is this book called Daydream Houses of Los Angeles. In the 1970s, the architectural historian and cultural theorist Charles Jenks, he began photographing, similar to, I like to think his spirit was like me, and we just love these buildings or these things we notice. But he began photographing the exaggerated houses that he encountered driving around Los Angeles, including in West Hollywood, where I got an invitation to present a project about anything. And so I thought, I want to do something about Charles Jenks and this project. And Jenks was documenting these places at a time when residential architecture in the US was becoming increasingly standardized, and he was calling attention to these fantasy houses that had been modified or built to exude personal character and variation. And so it was published by Rizzoli in 1978, and it includes, it's like a lovely paperback, maybe like 100 pages or so, less. with Jenks's snapshots of about 60 of these expressive and excessive houses that he paired with witty captions and often times an address so that his readers could go find them themselves. So I gave this illustrated presentation where I shared kind of this in-process rephotography project I've been working on that I called Revisiting Daydream Houses of Los Angeles. And it was about kind of considering the informal photograph, kind of almost the drive-by, or what we take with our cell phones and the value in that. The idea of the enthusiast, and also the idea of the tour, and in the changing experience of our city's residential neighborhoods, as well as the significance of his book after 40 years after it was published. So it was at the Schindler House again, which was not a house included in the book, but many of the houses around it were, and it was really lovely. It was a really special presentation because there were people who lived in the houses now or had memories of it, and it was kind of a participatory thing where people just chimed in, because I hadn't found all of the houses yet. But the process involved, and I love the presentation as well, as a format to share ideas. And maybe it's not going to be an exhibition, but it's a way to get your thinking, get your work out there. But so this follows the format of the original book. So the left image is Jenks's image, and the text is all Jenks' original text. And I located the exact place. Sometimes, again, there was an address, and took the same photograph as much as is possible, so you could try to see the changes. And so I really just love this book. And it was also just, it started when I found this book, and I was just like, these are amazing houses, are they still there? And so I just got curious about finding them and not really having an end project in mind. But I love his captions. Spreading Cadillac with L.A. Door and Henry Moorish. And and some of them, it's very clear that the building is still there. And many others, it's totally been demolished, long gone. And rephotography is something I also do with projects with the Center for Land Use Interpretation. But I love the bigger door that's still there. And then the last one, which is my favorite house, personally, in the book, but now it has, like many of these buildings in West Hollywood and these mostly West Side neighborhoods, there's privacy hedges. There's, it's interesting seeing like these trends, one in landscaping as well as towards bigger vehicles and things. So anyhow, that was a very favorite project to work on that is still continuing. I haven't found all of them, and I think I've talked long enough.